Resident Evil 0.
Starting a matter of hours before the events of the first game, we begin by watching an antiquated-looking train travelling through the Arklay Mountains, being sat upon by a strange singing man with some kind of messiah complex, who seems able to control an army of mutated leeches. The attack leads to the halting of the train and the apparent death of everyone on board. Fast forward a few hours and we see the STARS Bravo team helicopter flying around the mountains and, well, if you played the first game, you already know where this is going. Being forced to land in the forest, they soon stumble upon a crashed military vehicle with all of its occupants save one dead. The vehicle you see was apparently transporting a dangerous prisoner named Billy Cohen, who was under sentence of death for multiple murders. Believing Billy to be responsible for the death of the soldiers in the truck, Bravo team fan out to find him, and at that moment we take control of the team rookie and series waifu Rebecca as she stumbles onto the stopped train and finds, well, I think you can imagine. Not long after discovering the true horror of what's going on here, Rebecca soon bumps into Billy, who is clearly some old Japanese executive's idea of what an American bad boy should look like. And while Rebecca begins their relationship by trying to do her job, and not getting taken very seriously, they soon find themselves forced into an uneasy partnership in order to survive this nightmare. Their relationship is distrustful at first, but then this happens.
Okay.
And so we are introduced to this game's first major new addition to the gameplay loop, that rather than playing one character stumbling through the dark on their own, we're now working side by side with a partner to stay alive. The two characters in this game, much like Chris and Jill, operate a little differently from each other overall. Billy is very much the muscle of the pair, capable of tanking more damage and moving heavier objects than Rebecca. He also has a Zippo in his inventory, which is useful for certain puzzles. Rebecca on the other hand is considerably weaker in constitution, but is the only one of the two capable of mixing herbs for medicinal purposes, which is a big departure from the previous games, as just about anyone could do it in any other game. She also carries a chemistry set which allows her to collect and mix different chemicals as both the solutions for puzzles or to act as a poison cure. The pair dynamic makes for some really exciting combat, as the extra gun in the team means that monsters can be set upon you in greater numbers and come at you from multiple angles to create the feeling of pressure. Your partner is controlled by the game AI, though they can be set into a passive mode, and you can switch between the two any time at the push of a button, even if they're in another room a considerable way across the map. Thankfully, this is a well-made game, and your AI partner won't be wasteful with ammo, find themselves getting stuck on the scenery through bad pathing, and will even attack zombies that try to grab the other character, often allowing you to negate taking any damage. This is a big deal, as the defensive weapons from the previous installment are not in this game, meaning being grabbed is going to be a painful affair. That being said, the weapons in this game don't feel half as satisfying as the weapons in RE1 HD. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it's the sound effects, maybe the animations, or something to do with how the enemies react to the impact, but they really seem to lack the kick of the previous games. Zombies likewise go down pretty easily, with only 3 or 4 shots on normal difficulty, even those clearly wearing some kind of body armor. The ones that get back up again can be put down with another couple of shots tops, and those oh so satisfying headshots seem to be in short supply. These are all small complaints that don't really impact the overall gameplay though. Where things have really changed is in the inventory management and puzzle department. Billy and Rebecca have a combined inventory of 12 items, and providing they are close enough, they can switch out items between each other just by going into the inventory screen. This can allow more variety in weapon loadouts, though larger weapons like the shotgun and grenade launcher now need 2 weapon slots each rather than just 1. It also allows for multiple puzzle pieces to be moved around the locations at any time, and is a pretty neat little way to handle it. Likewise, there are puzzles requiring the characters to work together. For example, Billy turning a crank or holding a lever that opens a lock, while Rebecca goes and retrieves the item inside. Though, this doesn't always go as planned. There are also sections of the game where the two characters will be separated from each other, and will use small elevators to send items to each other that will help them to solve puzzles in their respective areas. These puzzles are quite satisfying, if a little time consuming. The elevator animation is also a little annoying, as it's pretty slow and can't be skipped. The second big change is the removal of item boxes, which has been replaced by the ability to simply put items anywhere you want, and this one mechanic is probably the cause of the biggest divide in the game's fanbase. As I mentioned in my previous review, the item box is a game mechanic that exists to keep the game flowing. That is to say that games need to make a trade-off between what is real and what makes a fun gaming experience. Resident Evil's challenge is based largely around managing and overcoming the limitations placed before you, and item boxes help to improve the flow of moving things from one place to another by not requiring you to have them in your inventory at all times. So this was a big, bold step in a new direction. And I'm sorry to say that for me at least, it did not pay off. The problem isn't so prevalent at the start. The train and the Umbrella training facility aren't nearly as big and sprawling as the mansion, and your available weapons are restricted to your handguns and a shotgun initially. So weapons and items can simply be placed on the floor near a typewriter and returned for when needed. It is, however, a real pain to actually pick up the right item when you've got so many of them scattered around. However, as you move deeper into the game, you find yourself running back and forth several times to ship all your items from typewriter to typewriter, and for some reason, it's only possible to have so many items in each room. This, combined with the fact that on your first run through, you may not actually know when the next big area transition is coming, can lead you to backtracking a lot more than you like to in order to find items you left back at the crashed train thinking you had no further use for. So, this is a big negative for me. It's a huge break in the flow of the game that doesn't really add anything of value, and this is a AAA game, so it was thoroughly playtested, and this glaring problem was opted to be kept as a feature. Which is a shame, because it's a big blemish on an otherwise incredible game. I mean, this really is fun to play. The opening scroll of Resident Evil Zero promises to deliver revelations about the events that led up to the viral outbreak at the Spencer Mansion. I'm not sure why, but I'd always assumed that the outbreak was by design. A simple cleanup job, a way to test the virus in the real world while removing the witnesses, aka researchers, and gather combat data for the Tyrant against the STARS members. Maybe I picked up that idea after seeing how Umbrella dealt with Birkin in RE2 upon completion of his research of the G-Virus. But apparently, that is not the case. Most of the meta-narrative is covered by some notes and journals left around the various areas you explore, and explained by a couple of expository dumps by the Leech Man in a cutscene near the beginning of the game, and one before you fight him, and none of the information presented there adds anything of any value to the story. But Resident Evil's meta-narrative has always taken a backseat to the real story of our protagonists being alone and confined, and surrounded by monsters, just looking for a way out. And this part at least is as good as any other entry in the Resident Evil series. You see, while Rebecca and Billy always have each other for backup, there's no one else alive in the entire space. That's right, Rebecca has one brief meeting with her commander, Enrico, a man whose fate we've already seen, and that's it. No other teammates, no scientists or secret agents skulking around to offer vague, mysterious exposition. Rebecca and Billy only have each other. And this is definitely the story's strong point. Billy, unfortunately, is kind of a cardboard cutout. There's not a fat lot of depth to him. When he and Rebecca finally do sit down to talk about his dark past, it seems that there's a lot more to what happened to him than meets the eye. I mean, of course he didn't actually kill around 30 people in cold blood, he's one of the protagonists. Unfortunately, this information has absolutely no bearing on the story at all. Nowhere do we discover that the villain of the game is in some way connected to Billy and his past, or that maybe he had actually been sold off to Umbrella by the US government and was being shipped off to become a T-Virus test subject. He was just a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. And while this is okay, it just feels like a really missed opportunity. I mean, this guy never appears in any other Resident Evil game. So, what is the point of him at all? Despite that, the partnership that develops between him and Rebecca is actually pretty good. It starts with Rebecca trying to arrest him, and then becomes a relationship of mutual benefit, and eventually evolves into a true friendship, with both characters going out of their way to protect and rescue the other from certain death. with Rebecca even disobeying orders from Enrico in order to stay back and find Billy.
Rebecca... All right. Just be careful.
The game's enemies are much like those in the first game, but with a couple of notable additions. Of course, zombies are back, and in greater number than ever. Really, what classic Resident Evil game would be complete without them? Hunters make their brief but terrifying return in a few sections of the game, as well as some new mutated insects and monkeys. These early T-virus mutations actually had me screaming at my screen a couple of times. Like the Hunters, they only appear in very limited areas, but my god, they're annoying. But clearly the most notable and indeed terrifying addition to this enemy freak show is without a doubt, the Leech Man. Leeches make a prominent appearance throughout the game and have a lot to do with the meta-narrative explained in its many notes and journals. It seems these leeches were instrumental in transforming the progenitor virus found by the Umbrella Founding Fathers into the T-virus we all know and are utterly terrified of. Masses of leeches now form up into the shape of an old man who was murdered by the company, as explained in an early game expository dump. This green manifestation is accompanied by its own terrifying music, which, if you've actually tried to take one of these guys out, will no doubt set your pulse racing, as this guy is a mini-boss unto himself. He can soak up a ton of damage and just refuses to die, while dealing out just as much to your character. Fortunately, in his initial appearance, he's just an old man with all the shambling grace of a regular zombie. This gives you just enough time to make like King Arthur and his knights and run away before he mutates into his larger, more agile form and begins carving pieces out of you. That is, of course, until you discover he's weak to Molotov cocktails and you've hoarded enough of them to actually take him on. So let's talk about the game's environments. The opening section of the game is the Umbrella train from the game's intro, and this is one of the most interesting things about the game. Resident Evil's environments have always had a claustrophobic atmosphere to them, but a train seemed like it could be a touch too far. I mean, you aren't going to be deftly weaving around too many zombies in order to conserve ammunition on a train, right? Which is why I'm happy to say that this whole section is an absolute masterpiece of level design. As it's the opening section, it's mainly responsible for teaching us the mechanics of item sharing and trading, and how that can be used to solve puzzles. Combat is intense, and zombie spawns are just frequent enough to keep the pressure on without seeming too overwhelming. The barriers locking up the train have a good variety to them, from simple doors needing keys, to ladders that you have to Batman rappelling hook up to. The train uses verticality to add depth and interest to its areas, with some cars having 2 floors, and even a couple of rooftop traversals to access certain areas. Add to that the fact that the level is so tight that the game flow is never broken up by the need to hoover massive items from one area to another, and the cute antiquated design of the train's interior, and this section is an absolute pleasure to play through. The only weak point is the Scorpion boss battle. It seemed an odd choice to have a boss fight on a train, as Resident Evil's bosses have generally followed a simple shoot and move strategy, which isn't really possible in such a confined space, leaving you with shoot, shoot, shoot. So with all this good stuff, it's really kind of a shame that it's at the start, because while the rest of the environments are fine, they're all things we've seen before in one way or another. I mean, when you enter the training facility, it literally feels like the Spencer Estate lobby with a twist. Now, maybe this is intentional, perhaps geared towards stirring nostalgia in players, and it's by no means bad. It's just the train section was so interesting, it felt like a step backwards to just be doing the regular Resident Evil thing of unnecessarily spooky looking facility. Resident Evil Remake came out in March 2002, and Resident Evil 0 released in November of the same year. This means that they were both in development around the same time. In fact, there exists an older, unreleased build of the game that was designed for the Nintendo 64, and bears much more of a resemblance to the PS1 games. So, given just how little time there was between the two releases, it really is incredible just how much better this game looks next to its predecessor. Not to take anything away from RE1's graphics, but I was really blown away by the clarity in the backgrounds and character textures when I loaded this game up to record the footage I'm now showing to you. This game really is as good as any old school Resident Evil game has ever looked. With the HD coat of paint, the in-game graphics look so good as to make the pre-rendered cutscenes the most dated looking part of the game. Not only are the pre-rendered backgrounds much more striking than those in the Resident Evil 1 HD remaster, but thanks to the incredible dynamic lighting, the characters look even more like they belong in those scenes, which really helps with the game's immersion. So I hope that by this point it's quite clear that despite its flaws, I had an absolute blast playing this game. This is old school survival horror with the difficulty cranked up to brutal, and that's always going to be a good time in my eyes. This game is definitely worth your time, and I think any Resident Evil fan will get something out of it. True, the great revelations promised by the game's intro don't amount to much of value. Though, being fully aware of what happens to William Birkin in the future, it is somewhat amusing to see him standing over an assassinated corpse laughing like a cartoon villain. But the game's challenges will definitely keep you entertained. And most importantly, goddamn Rebecca Chambers. Through this game, she becomes a much more well-rounded and fleshed out character than in RE1 Remaster. Sure, she's a minor player in that game, but she always struck me as too young to be playing cops and robbers with the likes of Chris, Jill and Barry. However, in this game, we see that she's been living through this nightmare for much longer than either of the first game's protagonists, and it makes the whole idea of her surviving the mansion by herself a lot more believable. This game justifies itself by transforming her from a wide-eyed, seemingly too innocent for this job character into an ass-kicking, monster-slaying badass.
Thank you, Rebecca.
If you're listening to this part right now, then thank you very much for making it to the end of the video. It really means a lot to me that you've taken the time to listen to what I have to say about these games for no other reason than I put the content out there. I'm not exactly looking to make it as a YouTuber, although it sure would be wonderful if I could just talk about the games that I love and make money off it. But I'm just doing this for fun. That being said, it would be great if these videos could reach as large an audience as possible, just so I can get some validation for my work. And then at least that will inspire me to make more. So if you enjoyed this, then please feel free to leave a like, and if you want to subscribe, there's going to be at least 5 of these videos. And I would love to talk about some more games that affected my life after this. So we'll just see how it goes. But thank you very much.